case of the two elements I described earlier, polymer fibers and graphene, those are used militarily as biological carrier platforms to carry a biological from the clouds to the ground. In the COVID outbreaks, we had 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of a biological dispersion in the atmosphere. We have the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera. We own an audio of him stating on the record in his own voice, what he did for the DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. We have Italian researchers identifying CV19 attached to atmospheric particulates. So, back to my original point, as the herd begins to panic and realizes this paradigm is done, we are circling the drain now. And climate engineering has helped to fuel that fire to this point. At the moment populations realize this, and are near panicking, near the pitchforks and torches moment, why would we think those in power would not use those biological carrier elements, again, polymer fibers and graphene, with something much more lethal, like Marburg or Ebola, pathogens that have about a 90% mortality rate? Why would we think that they wouldn't use that level of biological warfare and level the playing field overnight?
Hey friends, welcome back. Thanks so much for being here. That was Dane Wigington, my longtime friend of the show, and friend to you, dear listener, friend of humanity, sounding the alarm about the single greatest threat to humanity on this earth next to nuclear war. Geoengineering, climate warfare, chemtrails, and frankly, biological warfare from the skies. Ladies and gentlemen, sound the alarm, spread this far and wide within your sphere of influence on social media. This is the interview everyone must hear. Thanks so much for being here. Before we start, just a quick word about a terrific sponsor. Noble Gold Investments with a red alert. Gold has surged 46% in less than a year, doubling the gains of the NASDAQ and S&P 500. But this is not just another rally. Global reserves are shifting, exposing cracks in the monetary system. Investors are losing confidence in paper gold and paper silver, and they're demanding physical metal, creating a massive gap between the gold that's owned and the gold that's available. A lot of people only own paper promises. But this isn't just about how institutions broke another system. It's about how you can profit from it. Right now, Noble Gold Investments has a limited supply of investment-grade gold bars and coins available. As banks scramble to fulfill their obligations, pushing gold prices ever higher, you can profit. Smart investors are already moving into physical gold. Now, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Always do your own due diligence. But right now, Noble Gold Investments can make it easy for you to move into physical gold as well. And right now, when you make a qualified investment, Noble Gold will add a free 1/10 ounce gold coin to your order. Don't wait until it's too late. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com right now and turn their panic into your profit. noblegoldinvestments.com. Hey friends, welcome back. Thank you so very much for being here. We appreciate you so very much. Sean from SGT Report with my longtime friend and returning guest, a friend of humanity, and one of the straightest shooters I've ever interviewed. And guys, that's behind the scenes as well. Dane Wigington from Geoengineeringwatch.org is back. Dane, how are you, sir?
Thanks for asking, as well as can be given the state of the world, Sean. And a lot of people missing that right now. They're missing the wider horizon because of the nonstop political theater.
Well, let's talk about the theater, because one of the realities that we're seeing is decent people, in my view, being appointed to this administration, and at the top of the list is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I know you interviewed him recently, or maybe he interviewed you, but this is
Correct.
On your Twitter. And I want to play this clip just to set the stage so people understand where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is coming on the issue of geoengineering and chemtrails, and where the great Dane Wigington, who has really gone under the barbed wire first for humanity and carved out this issue as one of the most important of our time. Here's Dane's response to Robert F. Kennedy's Jr. about what is this thing called chemtrails.
Let's start with one thing that a lot of people have heard about, and nobody really knows what to think about it, but chemtrails. Are chemtrails real? And tell us about them.
Let's start with the appropriate place to start. What we're seeing in our skies are not condensation trails in almost all cases. They are sprayed particulate trails, and we're not speculating. We have up close film footage of military tankers and commercial, nozzles visible, turning on and off. Geoengineeringwatch.org, as a part of the film The Dimming, at great effort and expense, we acquired a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab, put top scientists in it, took samples at altitude behind heavy aircraft. We sampled what they were emitting. The sample was processed at one of the top testing institutions in the world. We found exactly what we knew we would find: climate engineering elements, starting with aluminum, which is named in one of the most significant climate engineering patents. And the climate engineers themselves have stated their goal of putting tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the atmosphere annually as part of solar radiation management to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy with no consideration of the consequences whatsoever.
Guys, let me just say, despite all of the winning under Trump, we are still being sprayed like bugs. Why, Attorney General Bondi? Why, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? I don't know if they have the answers. Maybe our friend Dane Wigington does. Dane, they're still spraying like there's no tomorrow, aren't they?
It's worse than ever. And I would argue that no matter who was the selected individual from the election, it would have still been worse than ever, because those that are controlling these levers of power are above any occupant of the White House. So we're seeing, yes, a more aggressive atmospheric aerosol dispersion than ever before. We're seeing much more aggressive chemical ice nucleation operations. So, Sean, you've seen how the temperature whiplashes. It's mind-numbing how much variation can be from day to day. And one example, that's Denver again this year, was just pushing 90 back to snow again. I don't know if you've seen that. You probably saw, I'm sure, the blizzards in New Orleans and Florida, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what didn't they tell us when that was going on? And again, I want to express this is a key core part of climate engineering operations that we're seeing now that's worse than ever. Those blizzards occurred, by the way, on January 21st, just for the record. And while that was occurring, Gulf Coast blizzards, what they didn't tell us was that it was above freezing and raining in Alaska, Siberia, Greenland, Iceland, Moscow. Nobody said anything about that. So you don't get blizzards with moisture off the record warm Gulf of Mexico without a lot of chemical ice nucleation. Those are patented processes. We've tested precipitation in these events, so we know what we're talking about. So what people need to understand, when these freak flash cold events occur, this is not nature. This is climate engineering, and that frozen material is highly toxic, I assure you.
Are your spirits buoyed by the fact that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now the head of HHS, and he says he will tackle this topic? He's going to look into it. I mean, at least now it's being talked about.
I wish I felt the same. What we have seen now, and I talked to Robert about 5 weeks ago, and he contacted me about 5 weeks ago. And I'm not really sure all the reasons why, and that the conclusion of our conversation was for him to expect me to know the names and addresses of who's behind this was not really a fair question on his part. I would argue, do we know the names and addresses of those that have committed crimes like assassinating presidents in the case of his father and uncle, which is a tragedy, but do we know the names and addresses of those perpetrators? No, but it doesn't mean the crime didn't happen. And my final conclusion with Robert in our conversation was, if this administration is serious about doing anything about this, and I would argue it's way above their ability to deal with this issue, and the rest is theater, but if they were serious, they would implement carved in stone whistleblower protection and publicize that. And there would be a stampede of whistleblowers in that case, but not unless or until. We've seen nothing in that arena. And what's more disturbing is that the primary group that is in direct contact with Robert on this issue, I mean, from my interaction with that group, the head of that group was in contact with Robert almost daily, it seemed, on this issue. This is the primary group communicating with him on this issue. And that group, the head of that group, has just adopted and is now propagating the "it's just jet exhaust" narrative. How is that going to stop this issue? Are we really adopting the primary official denial of what's happening in our skies and pretending that's somehow fighting this issue? And that has just occurred, Sean, since we spoke a week ago. Plus, that has occurred. So how can that possibly help this issue if the head group that's working with Robert on this issue, or the head of that group, is now propagating total disinformation that this is just jet exhaust in our skies?
Well, that's preposterous. And the world is waking up. See, I interviewed this gal named Kat, a really bright, caring, loving woman. She cares about humanity, cares about her family, and she confronted one of these chemtrail pilots at 2 a.m. She learned how to do the radar flight tracker. She could see them spraying above her house every single night. She went to the local airport and she confronted this guy. And you know what he said? It's not my department. I just get hired to fly the plane. So people are waking up in droves. Who is it? The head of which department said that it's just jet engine exhaust?
First, about Kat or Catherine, I know her. I've communicated with her. She's a good, solid individual, very strong sense of justice, and I'm very glad and grateful to have her in this battle with us. And it was important that she confronted the weather modification pilots, not to confuse weather modification with climate engineering. They're different, very different. It's comparing an ant to an elephant, but her confronting of these individuals was important, and it did matter, and it does show the mindset of those involved. So it's just a matter of scale. Any form of modifying the Earth's natural systems is bad, period. So when Kat or Catherine confronted these individuals, again, it was very revealing at their mindset of, I'm just following orders, just doing my job. And the same would be true with climate engineering, everything as well, Sean. So again, it mattered what she did, and her clarity on addressing this issue is very needed, and I'm very grateful for her. So in regard to those that are pulling these strings, again, Sean, we're talking about a climate engineering Manhattan Project, literally, with governments around the globe all involved, even adversarial governments. And we know this because we have documents, for example, at geoengineeringwatch.org, presidential documents, Senate documents, in one case, an 800-page U.S. Senate document going back to 1978, describing even then the intergovernmental cooperation between, quote, otherwise adversarial nations, China, Russia, U.S. So whatever the surface tensions are, they are absolutely all colluding and cooperating on these issues, on this issue, because you can't just climate engineer over your own borders or within your own borders without affecting the entire world. We know, Sean, because we have historical data to prove that Soviet weather modification scientists were touring U.S. climate engineering facilities during the height of the Cold War, and our scientists touring theirs. That's the level of collusion and cooperation that's going on with these programs. So again, and back to this narrative, and you asked, why would the head of this organization that is advising Robert on this issue abruptly, I mean, literally, it was a brick in the sky. I was contacted by this organization prior to all this happening, and was included in their website as their climate engineering council. And from out of nowhere, suddenly the head of this group adopts the narrative of the most prolific disinformation source on this issue of all, that is simply repackaging the official denial of what's happening in our skies, pretending it's just jet exhaust. And that narrative, as you just stated, is so utterly and totally ludicrous at this point. When we have up-close film footage of these aircraft, KC-10s, KC-135, C-17s, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off, this source that they have adopted has done zero testing. Geoengineeringwatch.org has done extensive testing over almost 2 decades, surface and atmospheric. We took a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab to altitude, top scientists in it. It's in the Dimming documentary, which, as you're scrolling through the page, it's on the top of our homepage. We posted that for free the moment it was done, even though we spent well into 6 figures making that documentary. Again, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab, which no one will ever be able to access again. Sampled what these aircraft were emitting. We processed that at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York. Top scientists, all on film on the record, proving climate engineering elements are being dispersed. All of that denied now by the main source advising RFK And we find that incredibly disturbing because, to our knowledge, this sort of 180 from out of nowhere would not have been done without Robert knowing.
It's so disturbing. We've been talking about this for so long, and I got to tell you, it brings up memories of the Deagle report, Deagle.com, and the estimated depopulation of Western nations, including our own, with a reduction in population from like 330 million people to 100 million people in 2025. And you may recall, of course, you will, Dane, because you follow this every single day. It's your life's work. But we got sprayed like bugs in the state of Minnesota. We got sprayed so badly that there was this impenetrable fog like I've never seen for 3 days. And then I found out that there were reports of that same fog happening all across the globe and all across America specifically. They're spraying us like bugs. Do you want to comment on that impenetrable fog? I've never seen anything like it, Dane. 3 days straight.
Yes, and you're correct. And it was in many locations. People were reporting becoming sick or ill while spending too much time immersed in that murk, if you will. And that is indicative of chemical ice nucleation operations. When you have a chemical cold surface layer, that's what we would expect to see. And that's indeed what we saw. So again, at this point, they're using the atmosphere for a physics lab, and we're all the lab rats, and they have no regard for the consequences, because a population that is becoming increasingly ill, cognitively less functional, that also serves those in power, because that population is then easier to control. And the level of climate catastrophe that's happening around the globe is absolutely off the scale right now. And people can pretend it's all this or all that or whatever source they want to pin this on. Again, climate engineering is the single most disruptive climate factor of all, by far, no question. But what's important when introducing this issue is not to deny that we have been bad stewards of the planet overall, because in doing so, and many that claim to be fighting this issue are doing exactly that. And what that does is immediately alienate many who we need in this battle. We need them to join us in this battle. And those in power have used that wedge to successfully divide the population, because they've trained many on the academic left, many in the environmental communities, that if someone mentions climate engineering, they're denying all the other sources of damage to the planet. And that's not true in the case of geoengineeringwatch.org. We recognize that we've been horrible stewards of the planet. Where would I begin on that front? But what we try to stress is, how can we have any legitimate discussion of climate anything without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation? And that's a hard point to argue, isn't it, Sean? That we can't discuss the climate legitimately from any perspective without addressing this first. Would that not make sense?
Oh my God, it makes every sense in the world, because, if we don't have a clean environment, we cannot be healthy. But I think that's all by design, and that's why people are waking up to things like the Tavistock Institute, to things like trans insanity, brainwashing our children, grooming the children in schools to reject God and to believe that a boy could become a girl and a girl could become a boy. How about GMO mosquitoes, Bill Gates? How about GMO foods? How about childhood vaccines and the vaccine schedule that is, I think, causing autism? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has made that link between the MMR vaccine and autism. Now he's backing off on that as well. But geoengineering, it's all a plot to hurt and destroy humanity. It's all completely anti-human, Dane. And you are the leading voice in this space. Without you, I liken you to an Alex Jones. But Alex Jones, I think there's a lot of people, including me, that would not have woken up, maybe at all, but would not have woken up as quickly had it not been for Alex Jones. And the same is true regarding this topic in your work, your life's work. So, I wanted to get you on again because I'm praying to God at some point we're going to hear some good news from you. But I guess not today, huh?
Well, let me back up. What you're showing right now, if I can, and I'll back into, you covered a lot of ground, I'll back into that. What you're showing right now is my confronting of the world's most recognized geoengineer, Dr. David Keith, at an international climate conference after his symposium of proposing dumping tens of millions of tons of aluminum nanoparticles into the atmosphere annually to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. My question to Dr. Keith was, have you done toxicological studies, human and environmental? His first answer, paraphrased, was, well, we looked at that. There's a lot of particulate matter in the atmosphere. A little more won't hurt. I followed up with the question before they cut me off. That particulate matter isn't aluminum nanoparticles. Aluminum nanoparticles, by the way, bioavailable aluminum's toxic to all life, period, no exceptions. His final answer, Sean? No, we haven't studied that. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. What kind of an answer is that from the world's most recognized climate engineer, not even addressing the question of what is known to be a highly toxic element? And they banned me, by the way, after that question to Dr. Keith from the following conferences that year. So again, they do whatever they want because the population is letting them, just like the vaccines. And you correctly mentioned, you said you think there's a connection with that in autism. I think that is not even debatable at this point. We know in the case of autism, from 1 in 10,000 children in the 70s, that now statistically, and they're still downplaying how severe it is, it's 1 in 25 in boys, very conservative, 1 in 25 from 1 in 10,000. That's a 40,000% increase. You think there's a problem? I mean, it's in direct correlation with the increase in vaccines. Of course, it's when you inject a neurotoxin into the human body, you are going to cause problems, period. And we know how toxic aluminum is. And now let's add mercury. And Sean, you know that mercury and is highly toxic. Well, both in adjuvants in the vaccines, mercury and aluminum. And so when you combine those two metals, as bad as both of them are individually, and they combine them in the adjuvants for many vaccines, the toxicity goes through the roof. It can be, based on peer-reviewed study, as much as 10,000 times worse, 100 times worse, 10,000% worse. That's 100 times worse. So again, how bad can it be? And now all of us have the same in us. We all have aluminum in us now. We're breathing it. It's coming down through the air column. We all have mercury in us from the amalgam fillings, from the burning of coal in power plants. We believe, based on also published study, that coal fly ash is being used as a base material for the aerosol operations because it contains many of the constituents that they choose to use for many reasons in these operations, all of it toxic. So now all of us are subject to that same synergistic toxicity that was in vaccines, combination of aluminum and mercury, and the combination of which creating synergistic toxicity, making the overall toxicity 10,000% worse, which is 100 times worse. That's the case with all of us now. So again, this is all out weather, chemical, and biological warfare, period.
Regarding the vaccines, you know, my oldest is on the spectrum, and he was born in 1998, and we didn't know any better. So we took him to every, child well baby visit or whatever the hell they call them. And those are actually appointments with Dr. Doom to inject your kid filled with toxins, to bring on autism, to ruin your family, to destroy the family from the ground up by destroying the children. Why would they put in the vaccines, guys, things like formaldehyde? That's what you put in a dead body to preserve it. How about aspartame? How about aluminum and mercury and so many other, Dane, I call them a witch's brew. If Disney made a movie about a witch trying to poison kids, that's exactly the type of stuff she would put in her concoction to inject into children. And by the way, I've heard that Disney is actually now going back and reverse engineering movies that we all saw since kids to add chemtrails into those movies because the skies are unrecognizable from when I was a child, Dane.
We have seen that in animated films like Cars, kids' films, Over the Hedge. They are in the background of those animated films. Back to your child, Sean, I feel so deeply for what you have had to endure, and I feel your rage, and I feel exactly the same. And now, with what's being dispersed in our skies, there is nowhere to hide. And we should stop and consider that, of course, those in power are trying to cull and debilitate populations. Of course they are. They've stated their objective of doing so on the record. How in the world can we possibly think that this isn't going on? We know there was no less than 239 open-air biological tests conducted by the U.S. military on U.S. innocent unknowing populations as far back as 1977. That's according to the Washington Post and other sources. So how many have been conducted since then? It's going on in our skies above our heads. How can people, Sean, you've seen the skies that look like literally something from a Vin Diesel science fiction film, and people pretend this is condensation? No, it's not. You don't have if you're in the middle of the Arctic, you don't see Arctic researchers with clouds above their heads because their breath's condensing. These are high bypass turbofan jet engines on all military tankers, all commercial aircraft. It's a jet powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted by design. It's nearly incapable of producing any, quote, condensation trail. And the conditions for a, quote, condensation trail are less conducive by the day. Why? Because the atmosphere in the upper troposphere and lower stratosphere is becoming rapidly warmer. And we know this because we've had two private jet pilots, they're former military pilots, have contacted geoengineeringwatch.org and very alarmed because they're private jets and they fly some very important people, were forced into autopilot descents, emergency descents from above 40,000 feet because the air outside was almost 50 degrees warmer than it should be. That air was not dense enough to carry the aircraft, which makes it, again, far less conducive to produce any, quote, trail in the first place. These are particulate trails. They're sprayed particulate trails. We know that. We took a NOAA flying lab to altitude. We tested it. We proved it at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York. So people pretending this is condensation is mind-numbing. We're being sprayed like lab rats, Sean. And as far as, I'll end with this, I wish we had something to hope for from any, quote, administration. But when we see this administration focusing on red food dye and nothing to do with the literal toxic fumigating of the entire planet going on above our heads every day, something's really wrong.
1,000%. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and as I was thinking about how to phrase it, I may have answered my own question. The question was this: who's behind this? Which deep state apparatus is behind this? I would guess the CIA, but we're discovering so many apparatus of government within the deep state that I didn't even know about. Mike Benz is uncovering so many incredible things. We now realize that the NGOs are basically in bed with the Demon Rat Party, and it's a big money laundering operation. But my spirit was buoyed by what might be the restructuring or hopefully the dismantling of the CIA to some degree, the ending of USAID, which is basically a slush fund. I think it was a $60 billion a year slush fund for the CIA. That's going away. The NGOs are being, I think, gutted. At least they're being exposed. We shall see. No perp walks yet. But then I realized, yeah, but this president just signed, I think, $1 trillion military bill. He wants $1 trillion to the Pentagon. So I guess there is no stopping this as long as the bad guys have access to trillions of dollars, Dane.
You're correct. And although I do agree with you that in some of these funds, there was the most ridiculous funding of the most outrageous, socially divisive issues. I know you know what I'm talking about with some of these funds and where some of that money was going. And that is designed to distract and divide populations to keep their eye off the wider horizon for exactly what you also just described. The pumping up of the military industrial complex, this cancer of control that has permeated virtually everything while populations walk around staring at their electronic appendage, not looking up, not looking anywhere that matters. And that's all by design. So again, any notion that we're heading in a right direction is a very naive notion. And here's the backdrop to all of it, Sean. We won't be here long without an environment that functions. And although climate engineering is the single greatest destructive factor, there are countless other factors. And it's important for people to look at this issue through a clear lens. And Sean, I know you've known about this issue a very long time. And I'm sure you've had people ask you, one, who's doing this? And I would argue all roads lead back to those who print the money, because they control all these agencies, these alphabet agencies you describe. They control the military industrial complex. It all goes back to those who print the money from thin air, because we know the Pentagon is missing 30 plus trillion that we know about in the last 2 decades. Where did that money even come from? I mean, there's so much black ops money in this equation that it's truly hard to comprehend. And two, Sean, have you had someone ask you this? Why would they do this to themselves?
Yeah. I ask that all the time.
So on that, because many people walk away from the notion that even though they can see this happening in the sky, even though they might be having respiratory issues and they see things dying around them and the whole planet is dying right now. I mean, that's statistically, rationally inarguable. Forest, plankton, oceans, insects, everything at geoengineeringwatch.org and I have tried to warn about for now moving toward 2 decades is happening at blinding speed. And it's not just beginning. We're in the very latter stages. So people will ignore all that because in their mind, rationally, quote, they, in this case, those who print the money, wouldn't do this to themselves. But how many examples of them doing this to themselves do we already have? And I cite the detonation of, I'll elaborate on the fires in a moment, as I see on the screen there. That's another issue directly tied to climate engineering.
Yeah.
But we have 2,400 plus nuclear bomb detonations. That contaminated everything on the planet, including they. We have Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. And that will be an extinction level event by itself if other factors don't do the job first, which I would argue in the current course will be the case. But we're building 60 more nuke plants right now. We have 442 online. And as society collapses, and it is, and many of the nuclear plants built at sea level, and that's going to be a problem very soon as well. They're not able to, they're going to be inundated. Some of them already are. And we have dilapidated nuclear plants being put back online, like 3 Mile Island, to power data centers for this AI control. There's so many layers of insanity, all of them leading to a destination of near-term planetary omnicide, and the same people in power. So here's the point. They already have done this to themselves in countless ways. And all those 442 nuke plants that will go into meltdown at some point, we're going to have hundreds of Fukushimas, and they continue to put the pedal to the metal. So we're not dealing with sanity. We're dealing with the headless, heartless, soulless cancer that will not relinquish that control, even if they kill everything in the process. And the sooner people face that fact, the better chance we have, Sean, of possibly collectively changing direction, pitchforks and torches moment. Everybody involved needs to be outed, exposed, held legally and morally accountable. And that includes media, mainstream media, matrix media, and those individual reporters who we encourage people to find a contact, send them a link to the Dimming documentary, because this is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat. We don't stop what's happening in our skies, we're done. Nothing else matters. No other cause, no other concern, nothing else matters. Send them a link to the Dimming. CC as many other individuals as you can openly, aware and awake individuals, so that whoever you're sending that to, if it's a matrix media reporter at CNN or Fox or whoever, MSNBC, or an elected official or head of an environmental group, farm group, but send out those flaming arrows and ask them to explain that data and why they're not addressing it. And by CCing 50 or 100 other people, now that person knows that many are listening to the conversation. Now you've taken the ball forward in a very effective way. Does that make sense, Sean?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I want to mention that there are states moving to ban spraying in our skies. I think in Tennessee, Florida, they've led the charge on this. And Dane, in the pre-call, I asked you if you knew how many states. I think you said 36 other states. It fluctuates. And whether or not these things get passed or not, will that actually stop the spraying? I want to ask you what's going on above Florida skies and share a tweet from Jane Ruby in just 1 second. But let me just point out a couple of things. United Nations Agenda 2030. Folks, you've got to educate your friends, neighbors, and colleagues about United Nations Agenda 2030. This is the plot to get us all off our properties and herded into smart cities. And I think that might be part of the agenda with these California fires. Surely the aluminum being sprayed from the skies and falling on plant life and trees and grass and shrubbery makes it all the more flammable, of course. But then you've got the issue of directed energy weapons. And one thought I had too, I want to get your thoughts on this and then circle back to the fires, Dane, is that you say, why would they spray themselves? Well, when you think about the money masters, the real power brokers at the top of the pyramid in this world, I just read the other day that the most multimillionaires on earth live in Switzerland. I bet they're not spraying themselves in Switzerland. They're on their estates. They're enjoying all their wealth. Their food is healthy. Their skies are clean. It's just a thought, Dane, but circle back to the fires here. Why did you say these fires are directly tied to geoengineering?
If I get back into this, wherever those in power choose to reside, the contamination on planet Earth is ubiquitous. We know that from peer-reviewed study. There's not an uncontaminated drop of rain on planet Earth, period. These are published studies. So there is nowhere to hide from this, even if there's not dispersions going on over a particular region. And the one country that we know is pushing back and not participating is Iran. Maybe that's one of the reasons they're so demonized all the time. But for those that don't know, Iran has invaded, and I don't agree with their customs or their culture in many ways, but they have invaded nobody for 250 years. How many countries has the U.S. military invaded, destabilized, and or occupied in 100 years? 100 countries approximately. So again, Iran's not participating in these programs. They've been on the floor of the UN trying to push back against these programs. So wherever those in power are residing, again, they're still subject to the same contamination. And In regard to the fires themselves, that we can hang most directly around the neck of climate engineering. And this is where, again, from the so-called environmental community that denies climate engineering, their hypocrisy is absolutely criminal. There must be more rain on a rapidly warming planet, not less. The atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. If there's not more rain, there's a factor we're not being told about or is not being acknowledged, and that factor is climate engineering. So in the case of the Palisades fires or the Lahaina fires, we know that followed the exact preparation processes that are named in a U.S. military document that geoengineeringwatch.org found in military archives called Forest Fires as a Military Weapon. And what's most alarming about that, one describes cutting off precipitation, which climate engineering is more effective at stopping rain than augmenting it. So in the case of Lahaina and in the case of the LA fires, the precipitation was completely cut off. Lahaina was declared a flash drought zone a week before those fires started. And the incendiary dust, which you very correctly mentioned, Sean, aluminum nanoparticles are such an effective incendiary. They're the primary element in military demolition. So you have now flora and structures all covered with this incendiary dust. You have the precipitation having been cut off. So you have flash drought. You have no moisture in anything. And so regardless of the source of ignition, and I want to stress that, source of ignition, that's a completely separate subject. What matters most in this equation, what is setting the template for these incinerations? And that is absolutely climate engineering, period. And for the so-called environmental community to deny this is absolutely criminal. They won't address climate engineering. We were told by their attorneys, Geoengineering Watch attorneys were told by their attorneys, they don't want to address climate engineering because they don't want to lose their 501c3 nonprofit. When you see what you're seeing right now in that film of beach homes with no fuel around them, incinerated to the ground, that is clearly something that has to have a lot of help to have occur. So in addition to the manipulated wind flows, there has to be other sources of ignition. And electrically speaking, and that's my background, the most plausible source is smart meter ignitions.
Yes.
And we know that that's happening because there's lawsuits for that exact scenario. We know, we have photographs of some of these houses in Lahaina and also in Palisades fully engulfed, the home interior fully engulfed, flames pouring out the windows, and the fire hasn't even reached that structure yet. There has to be another source of ignition. And again, electrically speaking, this is completely plausible. And so in the Carr fire in Northern California, I had an owner track me down and to show me pictures. It was an affluent neighborhood that burnt to the ground down to the slab here in Northern California. Again, we had the winds, the blowtorch effect. That's part of climate engineering. That blowtorch effect creates much hotter temperatures than you would otherwise normally have. You have the incendiary dust. But they showed me pictures. They were the last one to evacuate their neighborhood, Sean. And they noticed in their neighbor's home that the interior was already on fire. And the Carr fire hadn't even reached the neighborhood yet. Yeah. How can that be? I mean, they showed me pictures looking through the front window. The neighbor's house was on fire in the interior. So again, there's no chance you can have that uniform a burn as you saw in the Palisades fire or the Lahaina fire without multiple sources of ignition. The smart meters are the most plausible, scientifically plausible source of those ignitions. And these people have been planning for all of this for so long, Sean. And yes, you mentioned Agenda 2030. Do those in power have such agendas? Yes, of course they do. Here's what I would argue, and I'll leave it with this. Whatever agendas they have, which I don't deny, those agendas mean nothing on the current course because no one will be here. And I want to stress, I know how hard a pill that is to swallow, but let's look at statistics. Right now, today, we've lost 80 to 90% of Earth's insect populations, terrestrial and aquatic. And again, climate engineering, the single greatest factor. It's not only contaminating everything with bioavailable toxic elements like aluminum, it's destroying the ozone layer. It's not hairspray cans that are doing that damage. Of course, they contain toxic elements, but you're talking about, in comparison, a paper cup of water compared to a tidal wave. That's the hairspray can compared to climate engineering. Climate engineering dumping 100-ton payloads into the atmosphere, ozone destroying oxidizing elements and then manipulating those with ozone destroying frequencies. These are near-term existential factors on the current trajectory with crop loss, fisheries loss, forest loss, insect loss, ozone layer functional collapse. Climate engineering, the single biggest factor, not the only factor, I want to stress that, but the single biggest factor on the current trajectory, mathematically, statistically, we don't have to the end of this decade. And what's even a bigger factor, and again, I know people will roll their eyes and walk away because they've been convinced by all the programming you so accurately described from the time they're in school that any such changes on that scale would take centuries, and that's not true. That's not true. We've had the fuse to the stick of dynamite. The fuse burns along at a particular pace. Once it hits the stick of dynamite, everything goes exponential, and that's exactly where we're at, Sean. And what makes it worse and could make things go sideways overnight, once the herd wakes up to the severity and immediacy of what's unfolding and begins to panic, the power structure will play way bigger cards. In our rain, we know we have polymer fibers and graphene. Graphene is in our rain, Sean. Did you know that?
You know, I have heard a little bit about that, and I wanted to ask you about what the heck is being sprayed over the skies in Florida. Now, Health Ranger, our friend Mike Adams, received some samples from Dr. Jane Ruby, who lives in Florida, and he's finding some really scary, sketchy stuff, including what he thinks to be something like circuitry, maybe nanotechnology being dumped on us as well. So go ahead and get back to the graphene, by the way, if you'd like.
All that. Mike's been a big help in this cause, and I've talked to him recently, and all of that is definitely a part of the plethora of toxic elements as you described as a witch's brew so accurately. In the case of the two elements I described earlier, polymer fibers and graphene, those are used militarily as biological carrier platforms to carry a biological from the clouds to the ground. In the COVID outbreaks, we had 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of a biological dispersion in the atmosphere. We have the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera. We own an audio of him stating on the record in his own voice what he did for the DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. We have Italian researchers identifying CV19 attached to atmospheric particulates. So back to my original point, as the herd begins to panic and realizes this paradigm is done, we are circling the drain now. And climate engineering has helped to fuel that fire to this point. But at the moment populations realize this, and are near panicking, near the pitchforks and torches moment, why would we think those in power would not use those biological carrier elements, again, polymer fibers and graphene, with something much more lethal like Marburg or Ebola? Those are pathogens that have about a 90% mortality rate. Why would we think that they wouldn't use that level of biological warfare and level the playing field overnight?
Sorry for this quick interruption. Don't eat breakfast until you learn about caloric bypass. The term breakfast literally means to break your fast that you started the night before. About 4 hours after you eat dinner, your body switches from the nutrients we get from food to the stored glycogen we have in our bodies. And once those stores are depleted, typically 8 to 12 hours after fasting, your body shifts to burning fat for energy. This is where the caloric bypass comes into play. Dr. Gundry, a heart surgeon in California, learned that if you break your mighty fast with something called MCTs, or medium-chain triglycerides, you can actually keep burning fat throughout the day and use it for energy. By using this breakfast breakthrough, Gundry was able to lose 70 pounds just through diet, and he did this in his 60s. You can do it too and find out all about it by going to thehealthyfat.com/SGT. And you can get the information for free in this special video for my viewers from Dr. Gundry. It will definitely change the way you think about health. So go to thehealthyfat.com/SGT or click the link in the description box below.
Why would we think those in power would not use those biological carrier elements, again, polymer fibers and graphene, with something much more lethal like Marburg or Ebola? Those are pathogens that have about a 90% mortality rate. Why would we think that they wouldn't use that level of biological warfare and level the playing field overnight?
No, you're right. And by the way, I recall a video of a scientist, I would say, I don't remember what his title was, making a presentation at the Pentagon years ago, suggesting that one of the ways to control the herd from a revolution, because everybody's being pushed to the precipice, would be to spray lithium on cities from the skies. And then you have a guy like Bill Gates, Dr. Evil, saying, well, maybe we should spray vaccines from the skies as they release GMO mosquitoes. I mean, this stuff is so dystopic that the average normie who doesn't follow it and gets the news from NBC Nightly News with CIA's Lester Holt, they have no idea what we're talking about, Dane. I mean, this is an existential threat to humanity. And, I hoped the changing of the guard in the White House might give us a reprieve, but I don't see it. And I love the fact that you mentioned smart meters. Let's circle back to that. I opted out of the smart meter program in the state of Minnesota with Xcel Energy with 2 phone calls and 1 letter. They put one on my house anyway. Fortunately, my wife saw the guy doing it, saw the truck down the street. I ran down, read him the riot act. He got his boss on the line. I read the boss the riot act, threatened to personally sue them both. The guy came back, reversed it in 40 seconds, put my old meter on. I'm telling you, it is a plot against humanity. You're 100% right, Dane.
If everybody had that kind of tenacity, what you just described, to draw that line in the sand, then we wouldn't be in this mess. And if you look at the forcefulness with which they push the smart meters, every bit as much as them pushing the mRNA vaccine, then we should connect all these dots, because this is all a part of their agenda to thin the herd, control populations, and it's all in the same category, if you will. So bottom line, we are facing extremely near-term planetary omnicide. On the current course, no one gets out alive, including them, and they are stocking up their bunkers. And to some people, this kind of discussion, Sean, I know it shuts them down. This can't be true. They've been too well programmed and trained to face this dire of a reality. But the fact is, denial won't hold up much longer. We know they're stocking their bunkers. We talked to one of the main freeze-dried food suppliers in the planet that was offline for a very extended time, and they told us they were stocking military bunkers, though they had nothing available for retail. So again, there's no question this is going on. The deep underground military bases and those who think they're going to climb underground and ride this out, they're not going to ride it out. We know from past extinction events that were not nearly as severe as this, like the Pedum event 55 million years ago. This is all based on paleo data, but the comparisons are real. And the equilibrium period after that event was about 10 to 20 million years. What's happening now is exponentially worse because it's literally happening hundreds of times faster. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day right now. Try to think about that. People don't think there's that many species on the planet. Based on many scientific study consensuses, we have likely not identified only a small fraction of all the species on the planet. And we're losing 200 to 300 a day. That's 15,000 times the background rate. Try to get your arms around that. That's 1.5 million of normal. How long can that continue? I mean, everything's imploding, and we're going to have empty food shelves soon. And so what people don't realize is once that happens and the herd panics, we have Mad Max times 8 billion people. And we're close to that event. And they're feeding normalcy bias, Sean, until the brutal bitter end. And this, again, let's go back to the whole MAHA thing, make America healthy again. And let's simplify this. How could that possibly even get out the starting gate without first and foremost stopping the ubiquitous contamination of the entire planet, nowhere to hide, every breath we take from our skies, which is not being addressed at all. And in fact, which seems to be now heading in a direction of denial.
By the way, let me just add, I'm so grateful that you mentioned smart meters. Listen, you're one of the most well-spoken, thoughtful, intelligent guests I've ever had on. You're consistent year after year after year. You don't delve into conspiracy theories. You deal with facts, conspiracy facts. That's what we're talking about here. But when you mention smart meters, I want to thank you for doing that, because a big part of this wheelhouse, and I think you're starting to go there, and I really appreciate it, is the vaccines, the mRNA experimental death jabs that purportedly contain graphene that now pollutes people's bodies. One thing we haven't talked about, and I'm bringing it up because you mentioned smart meters, you got the 5G component here. Now, I just want to share this with folks just to think about the Deagle report, the vaccines, and the 5G, 6G switch. This from Jim Ferguson. The Deagle report, the silent warning nobody was supposed to see, published by Deagle.com, a military-linked intelligence source tied to the U.S. Department of Defense, CIA, and NATO suppliers. This wasn't a random blog. This was a site used by defense insiders. I'm not pumping this up, Dane, to put the fear of God in people, but I just want to point out that this, to me, seems like something that's plausible. The Deagle report said by 2025, entire Western nations would be emptied of their people. The USA would drop, as I said, see, I was going off memory. The population would drop from 327 million to 100 million. The UK from 66 million to 15 million. Canada cut in half. Australia wiped out. Not by war, not by plague, not by famine, but by something else. Something silent, something planned. He goes on with the thesis that the mRNA vaccine rollout that happened in 2020 contained graphene oxide, and then the simultaneous rollout of global 5G towers. I mean, do you have any comments on this? I don't want to get too in the realm of conspiracy theory because I respect you so much, but do you have any comments on that? Because how else would they reduce the population from 327 to 100 million in 2025?
Here's where we should sift the baby from the bathwater. On the particular subject you're speaking about, I am with you, and I think it is not conspiracy. I think the data is there to support that there can be electronically stimulated biotech. Why would we think this isn't a part of the equation? And all of these puzzle pieces do, in fact, fit together. So I think that trajectory and conclusion is completely plausible. Where I would depart from the Deagle consensus is the notion that they're going to thin certain portions of populations in Western countries. The entire ship is going down. Planet Earth is dying by the day, period. Its life support systems are failing. That means no one gets out alive on the current trajectory. So that's where I would depart from the Deagle consensus. And especially in third world nations, you have about 36 plus countries right now descending into total chaos because there's literally not enough to eat. We're on the cusp of unimaginable carnage, chaos, mortality. And so all of these agendas stacked on top of that, again, in the case of Western nations, would they take other provisions to make sure that they can control those nations as everything collapses or those populations? Yes. And again, the electronically stimulated biotech that you described is completely plausible. And they certainly have technology far beyond anything that's been disclosed. Because in the case of, let's look at the U.S. population, Sean. Is the U.S. population expendable to those in power? Of course they are. And they're not just expendable, they're a rapidly increasing liability because much of the U.S. population is armed, aren't they? So they would likely take extra provisions for those types of populations than they need to worry about for third world populations because they can just dump some more Ebola or Marburg and take those nations out anytime they want. And they can do the same to us, frankly. So again, where I would depart from the Deagle consensus is the notion that certain specific countries will have their populations reduced without mentioning other countries, without mentioning the backdrop of the planet's failing life support systems, the famine, and the other related factors, because those are also part of the equation. So it's important we all sift through this and look at all the dots correctly. But as far as the electronically stimulated biotech, Sean, I think that the science supports that consensus and conclusion.
Well, I had not put on my things to do list in my questions here for Dane today. I had not thought about the bees and the bee colony die off, but I know that's happening. And as we were talking, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of the enemies of humanity, how would they depopulate? They would do everything they've done to date. Everything they've done is going according to plan if you want to reduce the Earth's population. Now, in addition to that, Einstein said, once the bees go, humanity goes, because the bees pollinate. Nothing happens without the bees. Meanwhile, we've seen a record bee colony collapse in the United States. And I guess I would ask you, Dane, is it around the world? Because the bee colony die off 80%, 60%, 90% in some cases. The bees are just dying off. We're hearing reports of bees with dementia because of the aluminum in the environment. I mean, this is insane, but it is, of course, a satanically evil, brilliant plot if your goal was to extinguish humanity, Dane.
Well, you're correct on the bee scenario. Geoengineeringwatch.org was the first major source that we know of to publish that the insect populations were collapsing. We did that in 2012, and the so-called science community tried to marginalize our data and conclusions. We were working with former government scientists on that. They've since had to admit to it because they can't hide it now. On statistics like what you're showing there, a collapse of 80% in the last 8 months, even that is radically conservative and deceptive, because that 80% collapse was of the 20% that still remained. Does that make sense? So we're really talking about, from a pre-decline scenario, we're talking about being down to low single digits of bee populations left now, because people look at that statistic, they think, well, there must be 20% of the bees left from the original peak numbers. That's not true. We're down to low single digits now. Again, 80% collapse of the 20% that was still remaining. We're about to hit the wall. In fact, a lot of our Northern California flora bloomed because of the excessive heat. You know, we were 80 degrees in February here, and not a single bee, not one. I haven't seen a single honeybee here. And of course, after things bloom, and this is part of weather warfare, they're doing it right now in the Northeast again. After everything blooms and buds, they chemically nucleate moisture, cause a quick flash freeze, and they're doing it right now in the Northeast. They've already given the flash freeze warnings, and the same day as the flash freeze, temperatures are going back up to the mid 70s. Same day. Obviously, something is radically wrong. And of course, all of these factors converging. We face what's called converging catastrophes and an abrupt planetary ecological collapse. It's happening right now. And here's where the problem becomes even more complex, Sean. We have a population that does not want the truth. They think we can drill baby drill and frack baby frack and burn 100 million barrels. And again, I'm no Al Gore fan. I'm completely diametrically opposed to the environmental groups and their lack of willingness to address climate engineering. But we have a population that doesn't want to know the truth. They don't want to face the fact that this paradigm was a death sentence from the beginning. And we have a power structure that is clinically insane, literally. And we're caught between that. Those that are awake are caught between that. So between the hammer and the anvil, if you will. So again, we can't live like this and expect to live very long. Now let's add climate engineering. Let's add the vaccination, the medical treatments that are killing what's statistically, Sean, 250,000 a year die in the U.S. from medical malpractice and medical treatments. 250,000. We're living in an asylum. But again, and I know this is all very, very difficult to assimilate. I do this every day. This is all I do, is research these arenas, and it's difficult for me to assimilate. But if we collectively faced what's happening, if we prioritize, if we focus on the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat first, and that is definitely what's happening in our skies. You cannot hide from that. You can hide from an injection. You can avoid medical treatments that are harmful. You can't hide from the air we have to breathe. It's killing everything and destroying the planet's life support systems. On top of that, ozone layer. Sean, have you felt how hot the sun feels on your skin?
Yeah, I have noticed that on some days. What accounts for that? Is it being magnified by the aluminum in the skies?
Okay, well, it's interesting you bring that up, because there are days with our metering, state-of-the-art equipment, when this aerosol canopy is above, where we do see a lens effect. We do see that, and the UV is even higher then. But these operations are destroying the ozone layer. Your listeners can search geoengineering will destroy the ozone layer. The science community acknowledges, if we were to do this, as if it's not been going on for decades already, it would destroy the ozone layer. So here we are. It has destroyed the ozone layer. We are on the cusp of functional ozone layer collapse right now. That means the end of terrestrial life on Earth, period, and most aquatic life at minimum. So right now, with all these factors converging, if we remain on the current course, we're not going to be here long. If we can stop climate engineering, stop that ubiquitous contamination, stop the destruction of the ozone layer, stop the complete derailment of the hydrological factor, which they're using as a weapon to flood places like North Carolina and other regions right now that are being flooded. And still more regions are being droughted out and burned. If we can stop this complete derailment of the planet's life support systems and the complete contamination of the biosphere and allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done, we could at least buy time. Is that not worth fighting for? If we could buy time, we could focus on other issues. But it has to start with stopping the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, and that is what's happening in our skies. That's why we're solely focused on that at geoengineeringwatch.org.
Yeah. When I typed in bee colony die-off, the first return contains an interview between Redacted and Dane Wigington. I mean, Dane, you're all over this stuff. You're a warrior for humanity, and you're basically a watcher on the tower, sounding the alarm, saying the enemy is at the gates. No, in fact, the enemy is now inside the gates. And we better pray to God for cooler minds to prevail in this administration at the top levels, and people better stop drinking the damn Kool-Aid, because this stuff ain't going to end unless the people in charge put an end to it. And to that end, for my engaged, thoughtful, intelligent audience, what would you recommend people do? What are some actionable steps? Is it pick up the phone and call your congressman? Because things are happening in 36 states. People are aware of this topic. Now, whether or not it can be brought to an end, well, that remains to be seen. What are actionable steps you would recommend that people do, patriots do right now, today?
I want to start with stating that I'm in complete agreement. Rationally, logically, you can't disagree with what you just stated, that we are the ones we've been waiting for. No one else, no administration, no agency is going to fight this battle for us. So it's up to us. And on that note, all of us have much more power than we imagine if we simply put the rubber to the road. We have to remember what's in our control and what's not. At the end epilogue in the Dimming documentary, Sean, the editor captured from my weekly broadcast at geoengineeringwatch.org, our global alert news updates, commercial free. We pay that, we air that around the country on radio stations out of our pocket to try to sound the alarm. But the last 5 minutes was taken out of those broadcasts where I made this point, that any one of us could be the final pebble to trigger the landslide of awakening. And only by reaching a critical mass do we have any chance of stopping these operations. And we stop them in that way from the inside out, by waking those participating to what they're participating in, so they don't behave like the pilots that Catherine cornered and made them admit that they're basically just doing what they're told. And that kind of behavior has to end. If they're annihilating themselves, if they're exterminating themselves and their own posterity, and they and their families are made to realize that, in that way we have a chance of stopping this from the inside out. In that way we have a chance of awakening our military brothers and sisters to the fact that they are literally exterminating themselves and their own posterity. They need to stand down and stop participating. And by reaching a critical mass of awareness, that's the only way forward in this fight. And so how do we do that? Again, back to the spot fires of awareness that everyone can do from their own home computer for free. Do it. Draft a very short, to the point, professional, peaceful message of why are you not addressing this factor. Mail a link to the Dimming. Again, that's the standard for a tool on this issue. The Dimming documentary, available for free on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Almost 26 million views, Sean. Almost 26 million, in spite of radical social media censorship. The word is getting out. That's the A to Z in this issue. Send a link to the Dimming out, and CC as many other aware, awake, conscientious activists as you can. Openly CC them. So whoever you send this flaming arrow to, they're, again, aware that many are waiting for their answer. Many are listening in the conversation. That's how you hold them personally accountable. That's how you start a spot fire of awareness. Ask others to do the same. We're getting closer and closer to forcing this issue to the full light of day. And the media knows that, Sean. And that's why they're now desperately trying to, quote, debunk this. The last exchange I had with Alex Jones, the CNN covered that. In fact, CNN tried to debunk it with their little leprechaun debunker, Donnie O'Sullivan. Pitiful, transparent attempt to debunk what anybody that's not clinically blind can see happening in our skies. We need to wake the hell up. Don't think that someone else is going to move the ball forward. It's up to us, but each of us has the power to start these spot fires of awareness if we realize this must be a priority. And again, Sean, if we can just push this issue to the full light of day, fully expose it, I would argue the wheels in the battle will turn on their own, as people in these agencies and people carrying out these operations realize that they are, again, participating in their own demise, that we're all in a fight for life. And at that point, we would cause a shockwave around the world as we awaken populations to what's been done to them without their knowledge or consent. We need to reach that point soon.
Well, the other thing people can do is they can order these handout materials, these resources, put them in the mailboxes of your neighbors. I mean, that is one thing to do. I mean, it's grassroots, ground level activism. What is the best way for people to do that? And what does a packet of these materials cost? I know you basically produce them probably at a loss, knowing you, Dane. You're such a kind, generous guy.
In fact, again, this is my post, and this is where I feel my maker has placed me, and I owe this to the whole, and I will remain at this post. As far as those materials go, you are correct. We do pass our printed materials on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. We supply those materials free to state representatives all over the country, our expense. We just sent out many boxes this morning. So whatever resources I've had on this, I've spent my entire SEP IRA account. I've sold off resources to try to keep this fight going. And on those printed materials, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so instead of going out in the street and pointing and ranting, if you hand someone a printed flyer or a booklets, if that doesn't wake them up, they're not going to wake up. You've planted a seed, and when they're forced to wake up, they will at least know what's happening and why. But for others that are willing to face reality, those materials are the most effective tool to wake them up. Again, we are non-political. We don't sell anything else other than these materials to try to help activists. So if you look, we're playing chess, Sean. If we play effectively and efficiently, we can start many more spot fires of awareness. And again, we're getting close to this tipping point, this 100th monkey, and we need all the help we can get to reach that point. And if we can, it would overturn this paradigm, Sean. It would. If this one issue, every single weather cataclysm, and the list is endless, it's happening exponentially worse by the day. If we could expose this, it would be known to populations and those carrying out these operations and their families. Every single weather cataclysm, from firestorms to flash drought, flash flood, none of it can be separated from climate engineering. None of it. The liability issues for those in power are incalculable. That's why they will do everything in their power to hide this until the brutal bitter end. If we can expose it, then the entire paradigm will self-destruct. Doesn't mean our problems are over, but it means that we will have tilted the scale in the right direction. We need to reach that point.
I'll just make one last comment. I'm aging myself, but I'm glad to be my age to the degree that I was able to live through so many different paradigms on this planet. I lived when I was a child at a time when my skies looked like the picture at the top here. That's what the skies looked like just about every day. Now we live in the state of Minnesota, which is basically constant gray cloud cover as far as the eye can see, at least half the month. And when it's not that, probably the other half of the month looks a lot like the pictures below right here with all the chemtrails. Every now and then we'll get a few blue sky days with no chemtrails, but it's not very often. I also happen to live through the time where there were no cell phones. There was no internet. There were no pagers. I remember when pagers were introduced. All of this stuff has only served to, I think, make humanity dumber and more caged, Dane. We're a very caged species, and it breaks my heart.
I am so totally and completely with you on everything you just expressed. And I feel the same gratitude of what I've been allowed to see, what I've been allowed to experience. And all of us are in some way on bonus time, are we not, Sean? I'm sure you've had experiences where you almost got hit in the intersection or some car crash, or those things that we were spared from, that for me, in my mindset, means I'm on bonus time. I don't own my life anymore. I owe it to the whole, to the creator that allowed me to experience this. I've seen the undersea world around the globe. I've dove all over the world and seen the miraculous undersea world as well as above, and trekking through the wilderness, which I spent much of my life in also. And I've seen such miraculous things of creation that I feel responsible to try to now fight for, including our children that have no future on the current course. And that is not speculation. So again, if we look at things in that manner, that we owe our life to the whole, we owe our life to our posterity. And if we apply ourselves to that fight, that's where solace lies. Solace lies in fully facing this storm head on, knowing we're not alone in this battle. And if we all collectively do that, Sean, we can yet make a profound leap in the right direction, even at this late hour. So I'm so with you on this paradigm we've created is not in any deep sense fulfilling. It's simply a death sentence. It's a death sentence. And we're about to find that out the hard way.
Yeah. You know, I've said so many times too, Dane. Well, first of all, let me just address the fact that you are a steward of God's creation. You want to steward it because you love it, you care about it, you're God-fearing, you respect God, you care about people. But the enemies of humanity are malevolent. And yes, they're dictators because they print the money out of thin air. So they bought everything up. They own everything, including so many of these intelligence agencies, MI6, MI5, CIA, and Mossad. And so the thing is that I've often said if we had benevolent dictators, we don't want dictators at all, but we got them. And they happen to be malevolent. They hate humanity, they hate God, and they hate our children. I think that explains pretty much everything that ails us, Dane. And I'll give you the final word. And I thank you so much for your time today. I know we've gone long.
It's a pleasure and honor to join you, Sean, and I'm with you on those last points as well. This can only be called evil. That's which is in control, and populations have allowed this to happen. That needs to change. We need to reach the proverbial pitchforks and torches moment. And again, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Let's put the rubber to the road, and let's pull back the curtain. And I'm deeply grateful to you for your help in doing so. And we have the tools to do it. And if we can, again, expose and stop what's happening in our skies, we would overturn this paradigm, and it would drag so much else to the surface with it. And there's no hiding this issue, Sean. And this is important for people to remember. Many issues people can put in their rearview mirror, and if they can, they will. From 9/11 to the COVID scenario, countless other issues, if they can put it in the rearview mirror, they will. You can't put this in the rearview mirror. It's bigger and more ominous in front of the windshield every single day. As you said, what you see above your head in your part of the world is more alarming by the day. So you can't hide this issue. And that makes this issue one that if we approach it the right way, if we plant the right seeds of awareness, people are forced to wake up to it. But that effort will take all of us.
All right. The other thing we could do, guys, is pray. Pray every day, because I think we have hit a tipping point to some degree in the Great Awakening. And I think the planet is really on the cusp of something really terrific or something really horrible. And I think God can help steer the ship. And I think when you're most desperate, that's when people reach out, right? That's when you fall on your knees and you pray when you're desperate. We should pray every single day. And in this instance, we should pray for God to direct those who have the power to put an end to this in government, in deep state agencies, to be enlightened with the Holy Spirit so they bring this to an end before they kill us all. I don't want to be quite that dramatic, but I do think it's worth saying, guys, they want to kill us all, and it's part of an agenda. It needs to be stopped. I'll leave the link below to geoengineeringwatch.org, the great Dane Wigington. Dane, if this stuff ever is brought to an end, you deserve a special Medal of Honor for all your work because you're leading the charge. Thank you.
Team effort, brother. My deepest gratitude to you and all your listeners and followers. Again, it's our collective efforts that can yet make a difference. Thank you, Sean.
All right. Thank you. Guys, our guest has been Dane Wigington. The links are below. Get the packets, hand them out to your neighbors, start having conversations about this stuff. It's not even that awkward anymore. It's becoming mainstream. To that degree, I think we are winning, and the tipping point is being reached because people are no longer afraid to talk about this stuff and be labeled a conspiracy theorist. These are conspiracy facts. Friends, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll leave a link below to geoengineeringwatch.org and, of course, sgtreport.com, where you can get the antidote to corporate propaganda and all of those CIA, Mockingbird, mainstream media lies 24/7. And until next time, may God, the Creator, who you all fear because you're God-fearing people, may He continue to bless you and yours. Bye-bye.
Blinken's father was one of the founders of Warburg Pincus, an investment firm which is one of these parallel firms to the Rothschilds. So that's where Blinken comes from. So when you dig into these things, what you find is that there are these networks, and what's important about them is not necessarily the religion, because they'll use the religion as protective cover, but they operate as oligarchs, and oligarchs who see themselves as superior to the people around them. And Netanyahu himself has bragged that he gave $1 billion to Hamas. Now, that's not covered in the U.S. press.